I don't know why I still bother writing this down. Maybe it's because the eternal darkness I now live in feels like a mercy compared to what I witnessed at that station. What they became. What it showed me. The things I saw. Things no human mind was ever meant to comprehend are burned into my soul, even though I tore out my own eyes to escape them. Yes, I blinded myself. And if you're reading this, you'll soon understand why. But first, let me tell you how it all began. Because, if you've heard even a whisper of what I'm about to describe, it might already be too late for you. I have to tell someone. Someone needs to know, before anyone else makes the same mistake we did out there, floating on the edge of the abyss. My name is Ethan Hayes. I was the chief engineer aboard the Erebus space station, a remote installation positioned beyond Neptune's orbit. Our job was simple: observe gravitational anomalies and send data back to Earth. Too simple, I thought at the time. The monotony would kill us eventually, or so I imagined. I had no idea how right I was. When we first arrived, Erebus felt like a technological mausoleum. Its metallic corridors echoed every step as though they were empty caves. There was no natural sound here, no wind, no water, nothing. Just silence. A silence so profound it started pressing down on you after a few hours. And then came the noises. First, they were small things. A low hum in the electrical panels. An occasional creak from the walls, as if the metal were adjusting to the relentless cold of space. No one paid much attention. After all, we were on the edge of the solar system, where even the sun looked like just another distant star. It was easy to blame the icy vastness for the growing sense of unease. But something changed by the second week. We began hearing voices. They weren't screams or clear whispers. They were fragments of sound, like someone speaking far away through a thick wall. At first I thought it was interference in the internal radios. But one night, while repairing a damaged panel in Sector 7, I heard my name clearly. Ethan. I froze. My heart pounded against my ribs, but I forced a nervous laugh. Must be exhaustion, I muttered to myself. I went back to work, trying to ignore the chill running up my spine. To this day, I don't know if it was real or just a prelude to what came next. It was Dr. Karen Voss who first mentioned the dreams. She was our lead biologist, a meticulous woman who always spoke with calm rationality. So when she walked into the dining area one morning looking exhausted and frightened, everyone listened. I've been having visions, she said hesitantly. Strange. Dreams. Something massive, shrouded in mist. I can't quite describe it. The others exchanged skeptical glances. But then Adam Chen, our astrophysicist, slowly raised his hand. Me too, he admitted. Since the day before yesterday. It's like part of some ancient memory, something that shouldn't be in my mind. One by one, the crew started talking. Everyone had experienced the same dream. An enormous entity hovering between distant galaxies, its form indistinct yet imposing, radiating an oppressive presence that filled their chests with dread. Except me. I hadn't dreamed anything, or so I thought. That night I slept poorly. My mind was restless, flooded with confusing images. When I woke up, I found red marks on my hands, as though I'd scratched my own flesh in my sleep. I tried convincing myself it was a coincidence. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. From that point on, the atmosphere aboard Erebus changed completely. Some people began acting strangely. Karen spent hours locked in her lab, muttering to herself. Adam wandered the halls with a glazed look, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Others followed bizarre routines, performing repetitive tasks without logical explanation. Until I discovered the cult. During a sleepless night, I was walking through Sector 5, when I heard voices coming from the Advanced Research Lab. Curious, and perhaps desperate for normal company, I approached. Peering through the window in the door, I saw 6 figures gathered in a circle, including Karen and Adam. They were connected to makeshift devices attached to their skulls, electrodes monitoring their brainwaves as they chanted in unison. Their eyes were closed, but their mouths moved in perfect sync, forming words I didn't recognize. There was something ritualistic, almost religious, about their gestures. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't science. This wasn't human. I backed away quickly, afraid of being seen. I returned to my cabin trembling, unable to erase the image from my mind. Who were these people? What were they doing? The following days were a blur of paranoia and fear. I avoided contact with anyone suspicious, keeping busy with unnecessary repairs just to stay away from them. But the entire station seemed to be changing around me. The lights flickered in strange patterns, like coded signals. The security cameras captured movements that didn't exist. Once, I found a message written in condensation on the observation window. He is coming. Then came the nightmares. Unlike the shared dreams, these were personal. I saw the Watcher, for that's what they called the entity, looming over me, its form constantly shifting between something beautiful and something monstrous. Its voice echoed in my mind, though it never spoke comprehensible words. I only felt its intent: curiosity, hunger, desire. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, certain that something was watching me, because somehow I knew he really was there. Not inside the station, but close, waiting. Now, I write this on Earth, blind and alone. The rest of the crew is dead. Or worse, they became something I'd rather forget. Gouging out my own eyes was the only choice left to me. You'll understand why soon enough. But before that, I need to recount what happened on the day the line between dream and reality finally shattered. I don't know how long I stayed there, on the lab floor, trying to process what I'd seen. My hands trembled so badly that I could barely hold up my own weight. My heart pounded like an uncontrollable drum, and each breath felt forced from my lungs. I knew I had crossed some kind of boundary, something I was never meant to see or comprehend. They were changed. They weren't human anymore. Worse, they had become extensions of him. I saw Karen first. She staggered toward me, her movements unnervingly mechanical, as if controlled by invisible strings. Her eyes, those damned eyes, glowed with a black light that seemed to drain all hope from there around her. Her skin was translucent, revealing veins and bones pulsing with alien energy. She smiled, but it wasn't a human smile. It was wrong. Something that didn't belong here. You can see him now, she whispered, her voice echoing directly in my mind. It wasn't a physical sound. It was an invasion, as if she had forced her words into my skull. He has chosen us. Come with us. I shook my head frantically, backing away until my spine hit the cold wall. I didn't want to see. I didn't want to know. But I couldn't look away. They were all there. Adam, bent at impossible angles, his body connected to cables that sprouted from his flesh like metallic roots. Other crew members, their faces no longer resembling faces, but melted masks of something that should never have existed. They murmured in unison, words that didn't belong to any human language, yet I understood them instinctively. It was absolute adoration, total surrender to the Watcher. And then, he appeared. For a brief moment I saw him. Not just felt his presence, but truly saw him. A colossal, indistinct form pulsating between dimensions, as if made of shadows and starlight. Simultaneously, he was too vast, too ancient to be comprehended by any mortal mind. My vision failed under the weight of it. I screamed, fell to my knees, and my fingers found something hard and sharp on the floor, a shard of broken glass from a shattered monitor. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I knew that if I kept seeing that, I would be consumed. Like they had been consumed. Trembling, erased the shard and pressed it against my eyes. The pain was excruciating. It eclipsed every other horror I'd endured up to that point. I arched backward, letting out a hoarse scream. A swarm blood poured down my face, staining my hands and dripping onto the floor. The world around me plunged into total darkness. There was no more light, no more shadow, only silence and the relentless throbbing of pain. But I knew I had done the only thing that could save me. I didn't want to see anymore. I didn't want to know. When I finally calmed down, the sound of my own breathing was deafening. I was blind, but still alive. or so I thought. Groped around the floor, searching for something solid to steady myself. I found an emergency repair bar and slowly pulled myself up. The lab was silent now, except for the distant murmurs that still echoed in my mind. I knew they were out there, waiting, transformed, worshipping. I needed to get out of there. I needed to find a way to escape before it was too late. But even without sight, I could feel his presence. He was still here, watching, waiting. I stumbled blindly through the corridor, my trembling hands brushing against the cold walls. Each step was a monumental effort, as if the very air was too heavy to breathe. I heard voices in the distance, low laughter coming from all directions. These weren't human voices. They were fragments of him, pieces of his essence crawling through the station like toxic fog. I reached the communications room, tripping over motionless bodies and scattered objects on the floor. My fingers fumbled over the radio controls, trying to turn it on, but to no avail. Something, or someone, had destroyed the equipment. There was something written on the wall above the wreckage, scrawled with something sticky and dark. Even without seeing, I could feel the pattern of the marks beneath my trembling fingers. Strange symbols, incomprehensible, yet heavy with meaning. Blood. It was blood. A soft laugh echoed through the room, so close that I felt something icy brush against my cheek. I froze, my entire body tense like a rope about to snap. "You cannot escape," a voice whispered inside my mind, clear as thunder. Collapsed to my knees again, covering my ears with my blood-soaked hands. It didn't help. The words pierced through my flesh and bone, resonating directly in my brain. I imagined this was the end, that he had finally come to take me, as he had taken the others. But then, something strange happened. I heard voices, different from the ones that had pursued me here. These were familiar, human. They came from outside the station, distant but real. A radio transmission. Someone was trying to make contact. Summoning the last of my strength, I screamed back, hoping they could hear me through the chaos. I screamed until my throat bled, until my vocal cords gave out, until everything around me began to shake violently. It felt like the station itself was imploding. Maybe it was. I could no longer tell what was real. When I finally woke up days later, I was back on Earth. I don't remember how I got here. I don't remember anything after that moment in the lab. All I know is that I'm the only survivor. Everyone else is dead. Or worse. Now I write this while trying to understand what happened. I know he's still out there, waiting, watching. And I know that even though I gouged out my eyes, I can still see him. Always. I don't know how I'm still able to hold this pen. My hands are covered in cuts and calluses, my fingers trembling from the effort of turning my memories into words. Each line I write feels like reopening a fresh wound in my mind, as if the mere act of remembering is enough to summon him again. And maybe it is. Maybe he's already here, sitting in the corner of the room, invisible but present, watching my every move as I try to escape the inevitable. The transmission. That damn transmission saved my life, but not my soul. They found me, or rather, they found the Erebus, adrift beyond Neptune. The station was silent when they arrived, an empty mausoleum except for me. When they opened the main hatch, I was huddled on the floor, shaking uncontrollably, drenched in fresh blood, muttering incoherent phrases. "Heshir," I repeated over and over, even though I knew no one would understand. They thought I was insane, that I'd lost my mind after months alone in space. I don't blame them. How could they comprehend? How could they look into my empty eyes and see the reflection of what had crawled into my mind and never left? But they saw things. Things they couldn't explain. When they entered the Erebus, they found the bodies, or what was left of them. The corpses were arranged in perfect geometric patterns throughout the corridors, their limbs bent at impossible angles. Some had been hollowed out, their entrails spread across the walls in shapes that resembled ancient rituals. Others were intact but frozen with expressions of ecstasy, as if they had seen something divine moments before dying. But the worst, were the ones who were still alive. 3 of them were found wandering the station, naked and disoriented. Their eyes were completely black, without irises or pupils, and their mouths moved constantly, emitting sounds that didn't belong to any human language. They tried to approach them, to restrain them, but whenever someone got close, they began to scream. Not normal screams. It was something else, something that made people drop to their knees, covering their ears, sobbing like children. One of the rescue team's doctors had a nervous breakdown just from being near them. I never learned what happened afterward. The reports say they were quarantined and studied. I know the truth. They weren't human anymore. They were fragments of him, pieces of his essence left behind. I couldn't tell them any of this. There were no words to describe what I'd seen. Besides, who would believe me? A blind man, traumatized, speaking of cosmic entities and alien cults? Even now, as I write these lines, I feel ashamed to admit that part of me wishes they would believe, that they would understand what we did, what we awakened. After they brought me back to Earth, they locked me up in a psychiatric institution. They said it was for my own safety, but I knew it was to protect others. For weeks, I stayed silent, refusing to eat or speak. I didn't want to give voice to the things hammering inside my head. Sometimes, I'd wake up screaming, convinced he was at the foot of my bed, leaning over me, breathing against my skin. The doctors gave me sedatives, but nothing helped. The images were etched into my mind, vivid, as if they had happened yesterday. That's when I started hearing his voice again. At first, I thought it was paranoia. After all, I no longer had eyes to see. But soon I realized he didn't need sight to reach my mind. His words came as faint whispers, almost imperceptible, emerging from the silence itself. He spoke of distant places, of worlds where time didn't exist, of dimensions where matter and thought were one and the same. And slowly, he began to understand, not with words or concepts, but with sensations, with truths that transcended any human logic. He showed me things that shouldn't have been possible. Forms that shifted constantly, colors that pulsed like heartbeats, sounds that vibrated deep within my skull like violin strings being scraped. I saw entire civilizations rise and fall in seconds, peoples who worshipped his existence as an absolute deity, offering sacrifices in exchange for infinite knowledge. And I also saw what he would do to humanity if he decided to return. It wouldn't be a traditional invasion. There would be no armies or weapons. It would be something far more subtle, far crueler. He would use our own minds against us, infiltrating our dreams, our hopes, our fears. He would turn our leaders into puppets, our scientists into prophets, our artists into heralds of his arrival. And when we were finally ready, when our curiosity overcame our survival instinct, he would open the doors between worlds and walk among us, devouring everything in his path. I tried to warn them. I wrote letters, shouted at anyone who would listen. But no one believed me. To them, I was just a broken man, a survivor of some inexplicable incident in deep space. Even the few who showed interest seemed more fascinated than frightened, as if it were some kind of myth, a story to be discussed at academic conferences or explored in science fiction films. But then, something changed. I started noticing small things around me. Strange sounds coming from the hospital walls, as if something was moving inside them. People acting differently, speaking in monotone voices, avoiding eye contact. One night, I heard low laughter echoing through the hallways, laughter that didn't belong to anyone I knew. The next day, I discovered that 2 patients had vanished without a trace. No one seemed concerned. No one even asked about them. I began to suspect he was already here, among us, using other people as portals, just as he had done with my colleagues on the Erebus. But this time, there was no escape, no place to run. I don't know how long I was trapped in that hospital. Days, weeks. Time seemed to no longer exist, as if the very space around me was slowly collapsing. Every second felt like an eternity. Every sound echoed like thunder inside my skull. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think. I couldn't escape. The doctors still came to see me occasionally, but something was different. Their voices were wrong. monotone, emotionless, like recordings played on a loop. They spoke to me, but their words made no sense. They asked how I was, if I needed anything, but their lips didn't seem to match the sounds coming out of their mouths. It was as if they were just empty shells, puppets controlled by invisible strings. Started hearing things. Strange sounds coming from the walls, metallic scratches or slow, heavy footsteps. Sometimes it felt like something was crawling inside the very structure of the building, as if the walls were made of living flesh and breathing. There was laughter too, low, distorted, almost human, but not quite. It would come in the middle of the night, when everything should have been silent, and echo through the hallways like ghosts. I couldn't see any of it. My hands groped at the darkness, trying to find some kind of anchor, some solid certainty to hold onto. But everything I touched seemed to change under my fingers. The texture of the walls vibrated like wet skin. The sheets on my bed sometimes felt like coiled snakes, cold and slippery. Even the air around me felt thick, as if I were drowning in fog. That's when people started disappearing. At first, I thought it was paranoia. A nurse who used to bring my medication stopped showing up. A patient who screamed at night went silent. No one mentioned it. No one asked where they were. When I questioned a doctor about it, he simply replied, "They're fine." But his voice was mechanical, lifeless, as if reciting a pre-programmed phrase. Then they came back. The missing reappeared a few days later, but they weren't the same. I knew it before I even heard them. Their footsteps were different, heavy, dragging, as if carrying something enormous with them. When they finally found me, I felt his presence emanating from them like heat from a fire. Their voices whispered directly into my mind, bypassing my ears. "You can see us now," they said, though I couldn't see anything. "He is here." I tried to run. I bolted through the hallways like a cornered animal, screaming for help, begging someone to hear me. But everyone around me was a puppet now, their movements mechanical, their expressions vacant. When I finally reached the main door, it opened, by itself, revealing a world that shouldn't exist. The air was thick, icy, as if I had stepped into another dimension. I heard sounds that didn't belong to this world, low hums like giant insects, mixed with distant screams and hysterical laughter. I groped at the ground with trembling hands, trying to understand where I was. The asphalt beneath my fingers was cracked, covered in something sticky and viscous. It smelled of metal and sulfur. And then, I felt him. His presence was overwhelming, a pressure so intense it felt like it was crushing my bones. He wasn't far away. He was everywhere, looming over me like an impending storm. I felt his touch in my mind, probing every thought, every memory, every fear. I tried to resist, but it was useless. He was already inside me, burrowing holes in my soul like maggots in rotting flesh. I wandered through the city like a ghost, unable to stop, unable to rest. Each step I took seemed to pull me deeper into his domain. The buildings around me appeared to melt, twisting into impossible shapes that couldn't exist in 3 dimensions. The sky, or whatever was above me, pulsed with colors that had no names, as if it were alive. And amidst it all, I heard human voices, cries of pain, pleas for mercy, manic laughter. They all belonged to the people who had disappeared. Now, they were here, serving him. I found a group of them in an abandoned square. I could sense them before I even got close. Their bodies were no longer human. Some had limbs bent at impossible angles, others seemed made of constantly writhing black smoke. Their mouths moved in unison, murmuring words I instinctively understood. Worship, submission, ecstasy. "You cannot escape," a voice whispered in my mind, as clear as thunder. It was him. I felt his weight pressing against my chest, suffocating me. I fell to my knees, gasping, as hot tears streamed down my face. But he hadn't come to kill me. Not yet. He had come to show me, to make me understand. And for the first time, I did. He wasn't evil. He was necessary. A piece of a cosmic puzzle we were never meant to solve. He hadn't come to destroy. He had come to reveal, to show humanity its insignificant place in the grand scheme of things. I don't know how long it's been since I wrote the last words. My hands are covered in cuts. my trembling fingers barely able to hold this pen. Each line I trace on the paper feels like tearing something inside me, as if I'm ripping pieces of my own soul to turn them into warnings. But I have to keep going. I have to scream to the universe what we've done before it's all over. The city is overrun. There are no more streets, buildings, or people, at least not as they used to be. What remains is a pulsating hive, alive, made of flesh and metal fused into impossible shapes. Everything vibrates with an energy that doesn't belong to this world, as if reality itself were shattering under his weight. And he is everywhere. His presence is inescapable. Even blind, I can feel him hovering over me, inside me, around me. He doesn't need eyes to see me. He's already in my mind, probing every thought, every memory, every fragment of who I once was. I feel his hands, or perhaps tentacles, or something nameless, touching every corner of my being, tearing apart my existence until nothing but an infinite void remains. It's as though he's rewriting my essence, transforming me into something that shouldn't exist. I tried to fight it. I screamed, cried, begged for mercy, but he isn't cruel, he's indifferent. To him, we're just cosmic dust, insignificant grains on an infinite chessboard. He didn't come to punish us. Hekame to reveal, to show us how small, fragile, and irrelevant we truly are. And then, I understood. He was always here. From the beginning of time, even before the first atom emerged, he watched, patiently, waiting, not for us specifically, but for the inevitability that someday we'd build our own prisons and hand him the keys. That's exactly what we did. We built machines, probes, telescopes, all to scour the farthest corners of the universe. And when we finally found him, we opened the doors without realizing it. The others are no longer human. I've seen their transformations, felt their voices echoing inside me. They no longer suffer. They no longer fear. They're beyond that now. They're extensions of him, fragments of his will scattered across the world. Some still try to convert, me speaking directly into my mind with promises of transcendence, of absolute knowledge. They say there will be no more pain, no more loneliness, no more unanswered questions. That we'll become part of something greater, something eternal. But I know the truth. There is no transcendence. There is only consumption. My resistance is coming to an end. I can feel my insides burning, as if being devoured by acid. My flesh melts, dripping down my body like hot wax. The pain is unbearable, but at the same time, it's accompanied by a strange sense of relief, as if I'm finally freeing myself from something I've carried for so long. Something called humanity. Before I completely lost consciousness, I had one last clear thought. I remembered the first time I heard his call on the Erebus. That moment when I knew he was watching, waiting. Now I understand that he was always there, patiently waiting for us, small and arrogant, to cross the line between curiosity and madness. To build our own prisons and hand him the keys. When I woke up, I was different. My hands still trembled, but they were no longer mine. My body was no longer mine. I could feel his presence within me, flowing through every cell, every molecule. And for the first time, I understood that he wasn't evil. He was simply necessary, a piece of a cosmic puzzle we were never meant to solve. If you're reading this, it's already too late. He's already here. He's already inside you. They say that the first time you hear or read about the Watcher, he begins to observe you. I don't know if that's true. I hope not. For your own sake,